when I was interested in the Bible and religion, I decided to live biblically and follow all the rules of the Bible. I had a huge beard and the 10 Commandments, the whole thing. I wrote one about trying to be the healthiest person alive and following all the medical advice and changing my diet. And I did one about gratitude, and I just went all in on gratitude and tried to thank 1,000 people who had even the smallest role in making my morning cup of coffee. So yes, as you say, I do love to immerse myself in my topic and live it. And sometimes it's delightful, sometimes it's painful. It's usually a combination of the both. And then I try to extract from that what wisdom I can to bring the reader.
I think this was the experiment around, you being radically honest. And I think you said this was the worst month of your life.
It was pretty horrible.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Weeks. Welcome to another episode of the Bounce Podcast. My guest on this podcast is AJ Jacobs. AJ, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting people in the world, although he may not drink Dozakis. AJ is an author, journalist, lecturer, and human guinea pig. He's written 4 New York Times bestsellers. Well, it may be 5 now with this latest book that combine memoir, science, humor, and a dash of self-help. He is also the editor-at-large at Esquire magazine, a commentator on NPR, and a columnist for Mental Floss. And his strategy as a writer is to dive into something he's curious about and actually live it. AJ is a best-selling author. Some of his books are The Know-It-All, The Year of Living Biblically, It's All Relative, Thanks 1,000, Drop Dead Healthy, My Life as an Experiment, My Experimental Life. Some of these are just a book of essays. His latest book is called The Puzzler, One Man's Quest to Solve the Most Baffling Puzzles Ever, from crosswords to jigsaws to the meaning of life. In addition to his books, AJ has written for the New York Times, Entertainment Weekly, New York Magazine, and Dental Economics Magazine, which I should have asked him about that particular magazine. He has appeared on Oprah, The Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN, Dr. Oz Show, Conan O'Brien. He has given several TED Talks. I've watched 2 of them, including one about living biblically and creating a one-world family. The viewership count of the 2 that I saw was over 3 million each, so combined over 6 million. And on the podcast, we probe into his life and the experiments that he's conducted and written about in these books. We talk about how I came across his work in Esquire, a pretty funny story, and I'll point you to that article and the resources. We cover some of his more notable experiments that he's documented in the bestsellers, what he learned about reading the entire Encyclopedia Britannica on his quest to learn everything in the world. We talk about the hilarious problems with being radically honest and that experiment, and the possible benefits of white lies. We talk about what works, what doesn't, what's going to get you in trouble. He discusses which of his experiments was the most profound, and particularly one that was very life-changing. And we talk about how to be grateful, what he learned from thanking over 1,000 people in his book on gratitude. And we talk about how he thinks we have the happiness equation kind of flipped, what he learned about living the rules of the Old Testament for a year, literally. And we talk about his latest book and the benefits of puzzles, mazes, and whatnot, and the importance of psychological flexibility. I always strive for the meaningful on the show, but sometimes that can lean a bit toward the somber, which is fine, but it is wonderful when you can get a guest like AJ who is light and breezy, very funny, and very meaningful. That's hard to pull off, but he does it. I instantly liked him. I think you will too. So without further ado, here's AJ. AJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm super excited. I'll tell you how I found out about you a while back, but where are you? Where do I find you?
I'm here in New York City.
Okay. You're still in the city? No one's in the city.
Everybody
know.
Left. I read that New York City was dead, but I guess it's not totally dead.
Is it coming back to life? Everything looks normal?
Listen, it's hard for me to know. I know that commercial real estate is not doing well, but we do have restaurants on the sidewalks. So that's something.
Yes. Love that. So I want to go through a little kind of a bio of your experiments. You're kind of a human. Well, you are a human guinea pig, I would say. your whole life is it seems to be an intentional series of experiments, which I think is the coolest thing. And you have got to be the most interesting man in the world, AJ.
Oh my God, that's pressure. Now I really have to bring it. All right.
Well, I mean,
let me focus.
You're the guy that is going to have the stories because you're like kind of, I think it's George Plimpton, back in the day, you're one of these participatory journalists. When you set out to write a story, it seems to be you live what you're going to write about. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So for instance, when I was interested in the Bible and religion, I decided to live biblically and follow all the rules of the Bible. So I had a huge beard and the 10 Commandments, the whole thing. I wrote one about trying to be the healthiest person alive and following all the medical advice and changing my diet and exercise, sleep, stress, the way I went to the bathroom, everything. I did one about gratitude, and I just went all in on gratitude and tried to thank 1,000 people who had even the smallest role in making my morning cup of coffee. And it turned out there were at least 1,000, because there are all those hundreds of people we take for granted, the truck driver and the people who pave the street and the logo designer. So yes, as you say, I do love to immerse myself in my topic and live it. And sometimes it's delightful, sometimes it's painful. It's usually a combination of the both. And then I try to extract from that what wisdom I can to bring the reader.
This is awesome because, and if you don't mind, I just want to go through a short kind of bio of some of these experiments. You mentioned some of them, but this is how I found you. I read an article in Esquire. I don't know if it was 08 or 07, probably 07, or I think that was published date, where the article is, I Think You're Fat. And it was about this book, which I happen to have read.
Really?
Which I've never heard anybody ever talk about it, but I read it. I got halfway through it and was like, I'm not going to do this. But this is about radical honesty. A guy named Brad Blanton who wrote this book. So I think this was the experiment around, you being radically honest. And I think you said this was the worst month of your life.
It was pretty horrible. It was, as you know, radical honesty was this movement, or is this movement, where the founder, who's a psychologist, believes you should always tell the truth. But he goes further than that. And he says, whatever's on your brain should come out of your mouth. No filter. So the whole, I think you're fat. If he gives the example, if you're thinking about your wife's sister, you should tell your wife and tell her sister, like that you have feelings for her. So obviously it is quite a dangerous way to live, because normal people use a lot of white lies and they use filters, and there's a reason for that. Otherwise, there would be divorces and everyone would be fired and there might be wars. But on the other hand, maybe there is something to it. Maybe there is some wisdom among the craziness. So I decided to try it for a month, and it was a mixed experience. There were lessons that I learned that I have taken with me. On the other hand, as you said, it was the worst month of my life.
You started out saying, here's the truth about why I'm writing this article. I want to fulfill my contract with my boss. I don't want to get fired. I want all the attractive women I knew in high school and college to read it. I want them to be amazed and impressed and feel vague regret over the decision not to have sex with me. It's a fantastic opening. But what got me was you went to interview Brad.
Right.
And by the way, I think there's a difference between being honest and just having no filter. Those are two separate things, right? But anyway, you followed his method of radical honesty, which is no filter, just saying what you think, right? So you show up and you said that you felt kind of free to say anything that pops into your head in an interview, which you normally can't do. And you said, hey, I don't want to insult his life's work. And so you immediately tell him, hey, you look older than you do in your photo.
Yeah, I had to. I felt it was my duty to tell him the absolute truth, which was I was kind of underwhelmed. I thought maybe he's just a fringe crazy guy. And like, is this completely, is he a quack? I said, I have suspicions you're a quack. And he's thank you for being honest. So I loved that. He lives by it. He's okay with it.
By the way, this guy's gone through 5 marriages.
Great point. He has gone through 5 marriages.
So that's whatever that says. Yeah.
But he claims he lives a happy, authentic life. I mean, it is in a way authentic. I will tell you there were a couple of positive takeaways because it wasn't a waste of time in the sense that it taught me radical honesty doesn't have to be negative, brutal honesty. It doesn't have to be, you have a mole on your nose. It can also be, hey, I was just thinking of you, calling someone up and saying, you had such a great impact on my life. You are a mentor. And I don't feel I thank you enough. Things like that, radical positive honesty. And I do try to bring that into my life. I do, because Brad does say, you want to say, I appreciate. You can say, I resent this, I resent that, but always remember to say, I appreciate. So I think it's actually helped my marriage because I do try to do the radical positive honesty with my wife.
Yeah, there's no way I can be unfiltered with. So have you read Sam Harris's book online? It's a little small book.
I did.
It's really great, but he doesn't go as far as Brad saying, just, you got to say everything that's on your mind.
Right. But he is definitely of the tell your kids that there is no Santa Claus. And that's a complicated moral dilemma.
Where do you fall? Where do you fall in that?
I don't know if I handled it well. My kid said to me, and he was like 4, and he said, Dad, is there a Santa Claus? And I did the sort of fence sitting. Well, some people think there's a Santa Claus. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, I think that, it's a possibility. Maybe there's lots of things are possible. And he saw right through me and he said, I can tell you don't believe in Santa Claus. And then I felt I had to tell the truth. I'm like, you know what? I don't, but it's a lovely story and you should not tell your friends. And he was so annoyed at me because he had this knowledge over his friends that he couldn't tell them. And he had to keep it secret for like 4 more years. So I don't know.
I love this experimental kind of view of life. Did you read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica to learn everything?
When there was still an Encyclopedia Britannica. That was my first book. And it came about because my dad, he loves learning. He loves reading. And when I was a kid, he started to read the encyclopedia, but he didn't finish. He didn't even get close. He got into the middle of the letter B's, like Bolivia, and he decided that he had better things to do with his life. But when I got to be a writer, I thought, well, maybe I should finish this family quest and see what it's like to try to learn everything in the world. And will I gain any wisdom? Will I have any takeaways? Or will I just be super annoying and inserting aardvark facts into every conversation, which did happen. My wife started to penalize me $1 for every irrelevant fact I inserted into conversation. So it had its downsides, but it was also fascinating at the same time.
Give me one fact that stuck with you.
I guess I remember 2 types of facts. One are the ridiculously useless and weird facts, like that opossums have 13 nipples, that the philosopher Rene Descartes had a fetish for women with crossed eyes. Things like that was in the encyclopedia, which was a crazy thing that it was in the encyclopedia at all. But I will say the other type of fact I remember that actually makes my life better is that if you read all of human history, you will see that it's very clear the good old days were not good. They were terrible. They were violent. 1/3 of women died in childbirth just 100 years ago. So
makes you appreciate where we are.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. And not to diminish the problems we have now, which are huge.
No, but still.
Let's not have nostalgia. Yeah, let's not have this misplaced nostalgia and we've come a long way in many areas. Just even something I'm in New York, I'm looking out on the street here in New York. And if this were before cars, the piles of horse manure would literally be waist high.
It's was.
Crazy.
I read about that. Did you notice that there was a whole horse manure crisis back in the horse and buggy days?
Oh,
I think it was actually
know.
in New York. Yeah, it was horrendous before the cars. Yeah, so there you go. See, right. I didn't read the encyclopedia, but
you're a good reader. You're a bibliophile, I know.
You said the most profound and life-changing experiment you did was the year of living biblically. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
I read, so don't let me put words in my mouth.
Don't believe everything I write. But yeah, I would probably say they have all had profound effects on me. I've taken away wisdom from them all. But yeah, that might have been the most, partly because it introduced me to the idea of gratitude, which I then explored further in that book on coffee. But the Bible was where I really got into this idea of gratitude. And, the Bible book was fascinating because there were parts of it that were absolutely unhelpful, just having this huge beard and
Well, can we just real quickly, just for the audience, it was your attempt to follow hundreds of rules that were in the Bible, even the arcane and obscure, like there was one about not wearing mixed fibers or something.
Right.
That's what you did. You actually did. You went literally and just lived it.
I wanted to live the 10 Commandments, the famous ones, but also all of those hundreds of obscure rules, especially in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, that don't get a lot of publicity. And as you mentioned, wearing mixed fabrics is an abomination. So I had to get rid of my poly cotton sweaters. The Bible does say that you should stone adulterers. It says it many times. And not just that, Sabbath breakers and impudent children. So I actually did stone an adulterer. I used very small stones like pebbles. So that's how I checked it off my list.
Hang on a second. You walked up to somebody and asked them if you could throw small stones at them, or?
Just quickly, what happened was I was really getting into the project. So I looked the part. I had my beard and I was wearing a robe and sandals right there in New York City where I live. And I was in Central Park and a guy came up to me and said, "What's going on? Why do you look like that?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to follow all the rules of the Bible, from the 10 Commandments to stoning adulterers." And he says, "I'm an adulterer. Are you going to stone me?" And I said, "Well, that would be wonderful. Thank you for the offer." And I took out a handful of stones that I had been carrying around, hoping that this would happen. And small, as I say, they were small. And I showed it to him. He actually was very aggressive. He grabbed the stones out of my hand and threw them at my face. So I felt an eye for an eye. I could toss one back at him. And that's how I checked that off the list. And that is something that I do not keep up. So there are the lessons from that year that I do keep, and then the lessons I definitely do not keep.
And the dietary laws as well?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I am Jewish. I say in the book, I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian, so not very. And that was part of the inspiration of the book. I wanted to learn about the Bible because I knew very little about it. And the Bible's dietary laws are actually different from traditional Jewish kosher laws. So, for instance, the Bible says that you cannot eat baby goat that has been boiled in its mother's milk. That is the actual rule.
Well, these are easy.
Well, that one I was able to follow. I was able to not eat a baby goat that had been boiled in its mother's milk. I always said if it's an emergency, I could have a baby goat boiled in its aunt's milk or something along those lines, but I never even had to get there. So yeah, some of them were easy to follow, but some, like no coveting and no lying and no gossiping. I mean, as I say, I live in New York City and I work as a journalist, and that is 70% of my day are those activities. So that was a real profound moral makeover.
And you're wearing a robe and you have a beard because of the laws around
no shaving hair. The corners of your beard is in the so I didn't know where the corners were.
This is in Manhattan. Is that right?
Right. Manhattan.
Okay. So that's the best. If you're going to look crazy, that's the best. Right? I mean, people are probably not even going to notice you. I got very mixed reactions. So some people would cross the street with their kids to avoid me, and some would give me money thinking that maybe
I was in need, which I would then, per the Bible, have to donate to orphans and widows. So I wasn't making money off my look.
Yeah.
But it was, it was fascinating. And as I say, it changed me in good ways, but also made me realize, do not follow the Bible literally. And it's okay to cherry pick in the Bible, the laws. People make cherry picking sound like a bad thing, but cherries can be delicious. Just pick the cherries in the Bible about compassion and love and treating your neighbor with kindness, and not the cherries about homosexuality as a sin.
Spirit versus letter, because a lot of those rules were for the time. So I read some of the takeaways that you took. One of the takeaways from this particular, and by the way, I'm going to try to hit and get your takeaways from these experiments and that we can all kind of learn from. But you said that, I think I read that you said that living biblically, you learned that your behavior changed your thoughts.
That was one of the big, and this has been a theme that runs through many of my projects, that if you act, we all, we're the traditional form thought is that if you change your thoughts, you'll change your behavior. But I find it more effective to force myself to act in a certain way, to act as if, and then your mind catches up with you. And there's a great quote.
You hear that amorphous all the time. You hear that all the time. But
fake it till you feel it. But literally,
it's
powerful.
You experienced it.
In many different ways. I mean, even with compassion, because the Bible said you have to be compassionate. And I hate hospitals, but I had a friend in the hospital. So I said, what would a compassionate person do? What would I do if I were compassionate? And so I would force myself to go visit my friend in the hospital. And if I did it enough times that my brain caught up with me, I saw, well, I'm in the hospital visiting my friend. I must be compassionate. And you become a little more compassionate. And this is very old wisdom. It's modern wisdom in that it's sort of the heart of cognitive behavioral therapy. You act and your mind catches up, but it's also incredibly old, and you can find it. Teddy Roosevelt talked about, if you want to overcome fear, then you should act like you're unafraid. And there are all these examples in history of people saying this. And I find it incredibly powerful. I don't know if you've tried it.
I think your mind is your whole body anyway, right? So it's learning, we're sensing things. So I think it's a whole package. I think people tend to wrongly bifurcate or separate, these mental processes from physical processes. There is a bit there, but you know what I mean? That they are more related than people, I think, understand. So there's a whole, Wim Hof built this whole, I don't know, Wim Hof, right? The Iceman, the guy that can Yeah. So he has this whole breathing method. He's got these whole processes that are all physical that affect you mentally, and it's kind of mind over matter and, expanding your fortitude and other things through exposing your body to extreme conditions. Anyway, didn't mean to go on tangent, but no, I thought that was interesting. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that we experienced that because you were doing these experiments. And in fact, you said earlier that the spin-off book on gratitude came out of the Living Biblically. Now, are you an atheist? Were you an atheist? Were you a believer? What is your?
I am. Well, I grew up with no religion at all, very secular.
Okay.
And I still consider myself agnostic. I would say, interestingly, during the Bible year, I was praying 5 times a day. And that actually kicked in because I felt I couldn't do that without starting to believe into the being to whom I was praying. But as soon as I stopped praying, then I reverted to this agnosticism. But I often call it reverent agnosticism, or because I do feel I have a sense of awe and wonder.
Well, mystery, I think mystery is a spiritual component, a component of spirituality, embracing the unknown, in my opinion.
Yes, I am big on that. And it is. I mean, just the fact that there is something instead of nothing, it still blows my mind. It's crazy. It just makes no sense. So,
and gratitude, was there, when you're doing the biblical experiment, was it a prayer that led to gratitude? Yeah. Yes,
I would pray. I guess I did a sort of a mixture between thanking God, but also just being thankful and thanking the process, which is kind of how the gratitude book came about, because I found this ritual that I loved, and I continued after the Bible book, which was before dinner, to say, I'd like to thank the woman the farmer who grew this tomato for our spaghetti, and the woman at the grocery store who sold us this tomato, and try to thank all of these people along the line. And my son, who was, I think, 12 at the time, said, that's fine, I guess, but those people can't hear you. So if you really meant it, you would go and thank him in person. And I said, well, that is an interesting idea. So that was, he planted the seed of the idea, and I actually went out and did it. He wanted me to thank people for, like, chocolate or s'mores or something. So he was disappointed I chose coffee. But other than that, it was kind of his idea. And I still do love that ritual of trying to thank people and remind myself of the hundreds of people that I take for granted in every little thing I do.
And then your experiment on that was the book, Thanks 1,000?
Right. And that was the one where I thanked everyone along the way. So I thanked the barista. I flew to South America. I thanked the farmer. I thanked the guy who drove the coffee beans in his truck, but he couldn't have done his job without the road. So I thanked the people who paved the road, people who painted the yellow line in the road. And it just spun out into this crazy.
Yeah, that kind of made it into the jet stream, this whole idea about having a cup of coffee and then looking at the interdependence, how that cup of coffee got to your house. I had never thought of that. I mean, I was thankful that it tastes good, right? But there's this causal chain that we don't see that can lead to gratitude if we understand, hey, how did this get here?
Right.
Which is what you just, talked about.
Yeah. And it became especially clear when the supply chain had all these massive problems. And I do want to make one distinction, though. Just gratitude is not the same as complacency. Some people are worried, oh, well, you're thanking all these people, therefore you're just thinking life is fine and dandy, which is not true. And
well, wait a minute. You mean, is that we're off the hook for something just by
I think
about the people?
Some critics say, well, the downside of gratitude is that if you encourage people to be grateful, then you should be grateful for your $8 an hour job at the warehouse, and that it's a way to stop people from being activists and trying to change the system for the better. But the research says quite the opposite. When you are grateful, you want to help others. You want to pay it forward. You want to make the world better. So I just wanted to make that distinction. So it didn't seem I was being Pollyannish.
I can't imagine people making that assumption, but people will do whatever they're going to do. But I think you said to this point on, when you were doing this experiment around gratitude, you believe we reverse the happiness equation. We've maybe been taught that if you're happy, then you be grateful, which may or may not be true. But you're saying you think it should be reversed. If you're grateful and practice that way, it will make you happy or happier.
Right. Yes. Okay. And I feel I should be grateful to this monk a modern day monk who I learned this from, who says happiness does not lead to gratitude. Gratitude leads to happiness. And I love it. And I find it to be extremely true.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. When you were doing this experiment, that was the case. You felt happier. Yeah,
I did. I mean, I would wake up, I say in the book, my default mode, I think, is more Larry David than Mr. Rogers, more sort of grumpy. And I think all of us are born with this negative bias.
Or cynicism, a bit of cynicism.
Yeah, cynicism, pessimism. But going back to the acting, I would force myself for the first couple hours of the day to act as if I was grateful, to write these notes to people, to call people up to visit people and say, I just want to thank you. And after about 2 hours, your mind catches up and you are in a happier place, which I find happens a lot. Like it even happens. I think that I was born, my default is an introvert, but I also think that when I am with people and in a community, I am happier. So I have to force myself knowing that I'll be happier if I go to a cocktail party. This is pre-year COVID or when it's safe. And I have to remember that I have to tell myself this, you don't want to go. I know it sounds horrible and like a pain, but you will be happier. So I force myself to go. And 9 times out of 10, I am happier after I go to an event.
So I was yesterday in prepping for this interview. I was doing a long walk. I usually ride a bike or something, but I was doing a long walk. It was beautiful out. And I was listening to, I don't remember the interview, but you were being interviewed and mentioning the gratitude, the coffee. And I thought about these shoes. So I have these On Cloud shoes. And I just started thinking about those shoes and how they made it to my feet and how I'm not in pain and I'm walking. I'm not even thinking. We adapt. I think the great human capacity to adapt is a curse and a blessing. It's a blessing in that we can get used to something that's not great, right? We can kind of ignore it and go, we can get used to it. But it's a curse in that these great things we will take for granted over time just because we adapt to them. So I was on a plane a long time ago and I sat next to a pastor of some church and we just started having a conversation. He told me something I never forgot. He said, I guess we were talking about gratitude. I don't know how we got to this, but he said his son was in somewhere in Colorado and he had this office outside in the window. The view that his son had was of these beautiful mountains. And he said to his son, when he first saw him, he goes, you know how you will never take that for granted? Let me tell you, every time you see it, you need to say verbally, that is beautiful. You just need to say it.
Yeah.
That I never forgot that. And I try to do that.
That is good. Your comment brought up 2 things. So let me just, if I could. One is that a friend of mine has started this ritual of saying out loud the word delight when she sees something delightful or experiencing something delightful. And I think that's very powerful, verbalizing it, because yes, if you don't, then you just become acculturated. Yeah.
Make it groove your brain. Yeah.
Yeah. The second is that your story of walking reminded me of when I saw Deepak Chopra. We were at a conference together and he gave a talk. And I'm not I haven't read a lot of his books, but this story I loved because he said he was on a walk. He was like in India, a pilgrimage, and he got a pebble in his shoe and it just stayed in there. I guess he was too lazy to take it out for miles and miles. Finally, he took it out. And that freedom he felt when he was walking without the pebble. And he said to himself, why can't I feel this way without having to have that pebble in? So I love that idea, this idea that you should be grateful. Why should we have to go through the hardship to appreciate? Why should we have to lack for something before we appreciate it?
It's very difficult. And there's something about when you tell somebody to be grateful, practice, and when you practice, but a lot of things in your life that you are grateful for, there's other things attached to them. You love your wife, you're grateful for, but if you just had a fight, there's a little bit of weight around it, or a friend, or it's just, or work.
Right.
You're grateful for the money, but you just had a horrible meeting. So it's being grateful is sometimes when I'm trying to practice it is fraught with things. And then I heard a meditation once. I listened to a meditation. The guy said, look, find the tiniest thing. If the coffee is good and you're having coffee, start there. You really got to be grateful. And it's like, man, this tastes good. I'm happy. If you just find some small thing, you don't have to be grateful for every person in your life. And so, you know what I mean? And then it kind of branches off from there. Anyway.
I like that. Yeah. I mean, right. There's always going to be good and bad in your life. The key is to really make a conscious effort to focus on the good. And there are many strategies to do that. One of them is talking out loud. This may sound weird, but I have actually, in the last couple of months, started talking to myself more because it makes me more grateful. It makes me more aware. And nowadays, you don't look like a crazy person.
Just put something in your ear like you're...
Yeah, like when I'm walking down the street, like 30 years ago, people would have been like, let's get it.
What do you say to yourself?
I try to say what I'm thinking. So I might start out by saying, I'm going to the store to get some milk. oh, remember yesterday when that guy didn't return my call. Now, as soon as I hear myself say something like that, I am more aware of it. And I say, why are you focusing on the negative? You've got so many good things in your life. So saying it out loud,
it's an awareness.
It's an
awareness exercise.
Exactly.
Well, and that's interesting. That's interesting.
I actually have here. Look, I can prove it. I have these little signs all over my room.
So what made you decide to try that?
Well, I always love to experiment with my life. And I always had done it a little, but I decided, let's try it. One thing I try to get across is experimenting with your life is good. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to grow a beard and throw pebbles at adulterers. They can be tiny experiments. It could be a week without gossip.
It makes life more interesting, right, AJ?
Right, I think.
So this is interesting. You know, what you made me think of is that, you know why I talk to my friends? To externalize my thoughts sometimes. In other words, I'll call them and go, hey, listen, I got thoughts swirling around. I just wanted to talk to you. And all it is me doing that. I'm just exposing to myself, what is my chain of thought here? And maybe I don't have to call a friend. Maybe I just
well, if they're busy,
just spit it out.
It's always nice to talk to people. But
yeah. So I'm grateful to you for just giving me another experiment. So listen,
I want to hear how it goes.
Yes. You mentioned this earlier. Are you an introvert? Because I would think a native disposition like that would make all these experiments that you're doing way more challenging.
Well, I have to, as we talked about, I have to act as if I'm an extrovert a lot of the times. And then I start to be, and I do think it's not a black and white. I think you can be introvert, extrovert. You can be a little more fluid. You can be a little more, there's a spectrum, and you can move yourself along the spectrum a little, partly by acting. So yeah, I act. As I say, I force myself to be a little more extroverted, and I think there are advantages to both. It is always nice to, Susan Cain and quiet, and you need some time to yourself.
Well, I was just wondering how, if it was harder for you. I can't imagine doing these if you're. Yeah.
You have to. It's almost like method acting. Sometimes.
Well, now you're a pro, so you're. Yeah, but I'm saying when you first started doing it.
No, I had to force myself. Like sometimes I would look at myself from above and be like, wow, this is a weird situation. But I think it's good for me. I think, as you say, experiments keep our lives interesting. I think they keep our brains more flexible. Like you had mentioned, the ruts in your brain when you keep doing the same thing over and over. And this is a way to keep those ruts from happening and try to explore the whole mountain.
You're inspiring me. AJ, you're inspiring me. So,
Larry.
So were there any experiments? There had to be some experiments that you did that you'd never written about.
There are, absolutely.
What would be the funniest or the most interesting? Or
well, I don't know if it's this one. I never even started. Weirdly, a lot of because I ask readers for suggestions, and I have gotten several times people say that I should try to be the greatest lover in the world and do all the positions in the Kama Sutra. And my wife, I did bring it up with her, and she said, absolutely not. That sounds terrible. That is exhausting. We're too old for that. So I tend to agree with her, and I don't think I'd want to read that book about myself, certainly. My newest book is interesting because I was working on a different book. I had a contract and I worked on a different book for 3 months. And I still think it's an interesting topic, but it was making me miserable. So I said, I don't think I can do this for 2 years. I have to do something that I'm joyous about, what turned out to be the puzzle book. But I can tell you, because I do think it's an interesting topic, it was inspired by this whole epistemic crisis, this post-truth world. How do we know what we know? And fake news and all that. So it was called Fact Checking My Life. And I would try to fact check everything in my life that I took for granted. Like, how do I know the world is round? How do I know? My wife says she loves me. How do I know that's true? I'm not in her mind. How do I know that the New York Times is more reliable than Newsmax? And I am a believer in truth, and I do think science.
Well, that's a rabbit hole, right?
Right. It was a rabbit hole. And what it was making me worried was that I was going to contribute to the problem more than solve it. And that people might come out after reading the book and be like, oh, yeah, this is a mess. There is no truth. There is just competing narratives. And I didn't want that message out there because I do believe in the truth. It's hard to get to and it's complicated.
Wow,
and
that
it's
is
not
interesting.
black and white, but
it's not. To me, it seems like truth is always in the middle of two opposing facts somehow. I can see how that could be. I could drive you crazy.
Well, it was driving me crazy. So, I still think I learned a lot. It does help me.
We live by faith a lot, don't we, AJ, to some degree?
Oh, yeah. Like faith in experts. And
right.
You have to, because you can't prove everything yourself, especially now with this complicated world.
So let's get into a good segue here to The Puzzler. So the book is called Puzzler, One Man's Quest to Solve the Most Baffling Puzzles Ever, from crosswords to jigsaws to the meaning of life. You say that puzzles are fundamental elements, that one of the fundamental elements that make us human? Is that?
I believe they're a force for good. Yeah. I mean, it depends. Yeah. It depends how you define them. But to me, puzzles are anything that require ingenuity. So, I see almost life as a series of puzzles. Like the Gratitude book was about how do I solve the puzzle of being grateful in a world where it's often very hard to be grateful. But the book is mostly about, actual puzzles, because I have loved puzzles of all kinds since I was a kid. Crosswords. I would draw these huge pencil mazes all over my house. And it informed my life, and I loved doing them. I saw life as puzzles. The impetus for this book, I always feel I need some sort of interesting story to start a book. And a few years ago, I had this experience that led to the opening story, which was that I was the answer to a clue in the New York Times crossword puzzle. I was the answer to one down. And it said author AJ blank. And it was me, AJ Jacobs.
Well, that's cool.
I thought it was the coolest. I thought this is the greatest moment of my life. This is like, my wedding was good, but this is the holy grail. But then it took a twist because my brother-in-law emailed me, and he did congratulate me, but he pointed out that I appeared in the Saturday New York Times puzzle. And if you know the puzzles, they get harder and harder, and Saturday is the hardest, harder than Sunday. All the answers are totally obscure. No one knows them. So his point was, this is not a compliment. This is proof that no one knows who you are. And on that, I was like, oh, he's kind of got a point. So then it had this big asterisk. The happy ending, though, is I told that story on a podcast. A friend of mine had a podcast, and it happened that one of the New York Times crossword makers was listening, and he decided to rescue me. And he put me in Tuesday's puzzle, which is not Monday, but it's still pretty good. It's like where real famous people like Lady Gaga go. And
that's cool.
Yeah, that was true. I don't belong there. And he was very clear that I didn't belong, but he wanted to do a favor for me.
You got to frame that.
Sure. It's right there.
So this book has now got me, I don't do puzzles. I never have. But now you've got me interested in trying them out.
Do you like any kind of like logic puzzles or like mysteries and thrillers? Do you like any of that? I
like them in movies. I just never been interested or curious about puzzle games or even a crossword. I mean, I've done them, right? But I just haven't had that interest in spending the time. But now I'm like, you talk about Japanese puzzle boxes. I want to buy one of those now.
They are beautiful. They're like works of art. They're these wooden puzzles made and started in Japan. And they take all sorts of manipulations to open. And you have to maybe spin them. You have to move all these slots. And sometimes
they sound really cool.
They're so cool. And there's a cult of people. That's one of the things I loved about this. I'm very big on community and the power of community to help make us happy. And that's what I discovered. There was these 20 different subcultures of people who were interested in their various genres of puzzles. So the Japanese puzzle box community is very tight knit, and It's wonderful.
I haven't looked it up yet, but I bet you they're expensive as hell.
Well, some of them are crazy. Some of them are like $50,000. And I remember.
And you just jacked them all up with this book, I guarantee you.
Exactly. Well, I do remember that Russian oligarchs were bidding on them. And hopefully that's over now. But that was a complaint.
But I do occasionally like an escape room. Now,
you do?
They weren't
good.
They weren't voluntary. Like I've always gone with a group, said, hey, this is an activity we're going to do. And so I've done it. So it was never my idea. If you get the right team together, it's kind of fun. By the way, is there a secret to escape rooms? Have you learned anything? Is there anything you can tell me?
I do. I have a couple of my favorite escape room facts. First of all, just in general, though, I do want to echo what you said. I think escape rooms are great because puzzles, to me, are a communal activity. They bring people together, and that is one of their true advantages. But as for escape rooms, my two favorite escape room facts are, one, I interviewed dozens of these owners, and many of, if not most of them, they say that there's this one guy who comes in every week with a different woman, a different date, and pretends that it's his first time at the escape room to like wow her with his skill.
That's actually not a bad, that's pretty clever.
It's clever. Yeah. It's using puzzles for evil, I think.
Yes.
I'm very much using puzzles for good. And then the other one, which I didn't expect, is a demographic that apparently likes escape rooms quite a bit is nudists. And if you think about it, it's because they can't go bowling or the movie, but you go to an escape room, they shut the door.
They rent the place.
They rent the place and they do their thing nude and then they put on their clothes. And so,
I got all kind of joke ideas right now that I am not going to.
Go ahead. You can edit them out. You're the boss.
That is interesting. So you said there are people that solve a Rubik's Cube with their feet and they do it fast. What?
Well, Rubik's Cubes are just fascinating because they are, they came out in the 80s and they were huge. They kind of waned a little. Now they're back because of YouTube, and millions and millions of these kids do them, and they do them so fast, it'll boggle your mind. The record is 3.5 seconds to do a Rubik's Cube. And I can't even look at a Rubik's Cube in 3.5 seconds. And then there are people, who do them with their feet. There's the blindfolded. There's the juggling while blindfolded, and they solve them while they're juggling. So it's really an extraordinary feat. And one of the things I love, I'm not great at Rubik's Cubes. I'm pretty good at word puzzles, but I'm pretty weak at Rubik's Cubes. But one of the aspects that I love about Rubik's Cube that I talk about is a Rubik's Cube can be arranged in 43 quintillion different arrangements, which is just a mind-boggling number. We can't even comprehend that. I think it's more than the grains of sand. I have in my book the various.
Well, you read about that in Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah, I should know. But it is just a mind-boggling number, and that just the idea that some kid can take a Rubik's Cube and find that one solution out of 43 quintillion in 3.5 seconds. I mean, that to me is inspiring and optimism inducing. That's like the smallest needle in the biggest haystack ever created.
What should somebody like me who's not into puzzles, what should I dip my toe in from a puzzle standpoint?
I am a big fan, as you said, of making it a communal activity. And one is Wordle. I don't know if you've tried Wordle.
I've heard that is like super popular.
It's huge.
I've never played it.
You have to guess a 5-letter word and you have 5 guesses, I think, maybe 6. But it's not that hard. You usually get it. I like to think of it as the Tom Hanks of puzzles. It's very nice. It's approachable. It's not threatening. And what's great is that you get to talk with your friends and either complain about it or say, oh my God, can you believe that? And I actually saw the guy who invented Wordle. I saw him speak. I went to a crossword puzzle convention just 2 months ago. And he told this story of what he loves is it brings people together. And he told the story, it sounded like a screenplay, that this gay man was ostracized from his family, his conservative family, and they weren't talking. And then they started to play Wordle together. And this was the bond that kind of brought them back together. That to me is what I love about puzzles, is that they really are a way for people to have teamwork, to communicate. So yeah, give Wordle a shot.
All right. So let's kind of wrap on this note on psychological flexibility and the corn maze.
Oh, yes. One of the types of puzzles I explored was mazes, which have been around for centuries. Corn mazes actually have not been around very long. These are the ones that are in cornfields, but they're very popular. There are hundreds of them. And I went to what is allegedly the hardest corn maze in the world. It's in Vermont, and it's called the Great Vermont Corn Maze. The guy who runs it is hilarious because he's almost gleeful in his sadism. He talks about how this maze...
People can't get out.
Yeah, they can't. Well, you do eventually get out, and he'll tell you how to get. No one's actually died.
There's skeletons. What is a game? So he's...
It takes, it took me about 4.5 hours. So
you went through it in 4 hours. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was not easy. And he talks about people, crying and couples break up, and the father like abandon their wife and kids because they're so frustrated.
I shouldn't be laughing. That's
it is. But what I thought the wisdom, I always try to find the wisdom. And I asked him, what lessons about humans has he learned? And he says, the big lesson is that you have to be flexible in your thinking. And he said, young men, especially, can be so stubborn. As a former young man, I can totally relate. And he will say, he stands on a platform and watches people try to solve it. And these young men will go down a corridor, they'll hit a dead end. They'll be like, no, all right. And then they'll go back, but they'll be so sure that that's the right way because they have it in their mind. This is the solutions. They'll just keep going down that same corridor over and over, banging their head against the corn maze. And that is something that's not just in corn mazes, but it's across every type of puzzle. You have to be flexible. Do not fall in love with your hypothesis. And I think that extends way beyond mazes. Puzzles. That is the way we have to approach life, is that you have to have some humility, epistemic humility. You have to be open to change and other evidence. And one of the examples I give in my book is I try to treat conversations or debates more like a puzzle. So if I'm talking to someone who's on the other side of the political spectrum, I could try to see it as a war of words and try to berate them and convince them with my facts and figures and yell at them. That rarely seems to be productive. In fact, it often is counterproductive. It polarizes both parties. So instead, I try to visualize it as a puzzle. So I ask myself, why does she believe what she believes? Why do I believe what I believe? Is there any evidence? I often ask out loud, is there any evidence I could present that would change your mind? Or what evidence is there? What do we agree on? What do we really disagree on? Where can we go from here? All of these are interesting puzzles, and it becomes a more collaborative adventure in solving these puzzles as opposed to a war. And I do think that often leads to much more productive and certainly more pleasurable interactions with people.
I really like that because it does a couple of things. One, I think that kind of the baseline attribute for keeping an open mind is curiosity. But it's hard to insert or evoke curiosity. But if you gamify this idea of this is a puzzle, what are the pieces? What's missing here that I don't know? That framework gets you there instantly, I think. It puts you in that curiosity. That's cool. I like that.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, there's a phrase I learned from a child psychologist. Don't get furious. get curious. And I actually made that sort of the motto of my puzzle book, because it doesn't just apply to parents whose kids are throwing a tantrum. It applies to everything. And that's, don't get fear. Anger does have its place, but often it gives us tunnel vision. It makes it harder to find solutions.
Were you always an experiment? I know we're at the end of time, but I'm just curious, did your writing was that your angle in writing? And now you are?
This is one thing I was born with. I think that, I'm certainly not the best athlete or the best, best looking or, even smartest, but I do have, I think I'm in like...
You're very an attractive man, AJ. Okay.
Right back at you, Larry.
Just remind
I did just get a haircut.
See, I didn't hold back. I didn't hold back.
Yes, anyway. Thank you for your radical honesty. But I've always had a deep curiosity, and it's my gratitude and curiosity, I think, are my two favorite virtues. And I once interviewed for Esquire the late, great Alex Trebek, and host of Jeopardy! And he had a quote that I still think about all the time. He said, "I am curious about everything, even those things that don't interest me." And I heard that and I was like, that doesn't totally make sense, but I also totally get it. I am also curious about everything, even the boring things, because I think something that's boring, if you just scratch the surface, it's not boring. There's so many complexities in any topic you choose. And in fact, that was a book idea that I rejected pretty quickly, but I said, like, what if I tried to take the most boring topics ever, like the almost stereotypically boring topics like accounting, and then try to figure out, can I make this interesting? Can I be curious about it? And I'm sure I could. I haven't done it, but if you think about it, accounting is not just dry numbers. It's numbers that represent people's dreams and loves and passions and conflicts on their business. So I'm sure it's fascinating once you get into it. Yeah. Someone can prove me wrong, but I do like to be curious about everything, even those things that don't interest me.
So the Puzzler, it came out
just a couple months, 6
April?
weeks ago.
Yeah, 6 weeks. And I just ordered my hard copy. And the reason I ordered a hard copy is because there are actual puzzles in there, right?
Right.
So because
exactly.
I didn't want to get the digital because I was like, I'm not going to be able to do anything with, I don't think I would be able to do anything with the digital version. And where can people find you, AJ? Your website? Is that?
Yeah, my website, ajjacobs.com, the usual, Twitter at ajjacobs. And yeah, as I mentioned, I have this 2-book contract. When I signed up to do the puzzle book, they said, and you also owe us another. And I haven't figured out what that next one is. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know.
It must be fun to kind of this be your genre, the experiments, because I don't know, the possibilities are, well, it could be frightening too, I guess.
Well, I feel very lucky that I'm able to make a living for now. Who knows how long it'll last, but doing these experiments. But as you say, some of them are incredibly unpleasant at the time, but in retrospect, I love having had the experience.
AJ, thank you again for coming on. You exceeded my expectations. You're very engaging. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for what you do. I have loved listening to your podcast, and it has changed my life. I'm actually, there were 2 guests in particular who I'm going to buy their books. And so thank you for that.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit LarryWeeks.com, and we will talk again soon.